Welcome to Forbidden Files. If you looked at a Soviet map from 1960, you would not find them. No name, no road, no dot on the map. But they were there. Entire cities, hundreds of thousands of people, living, working, raising children in places that officially did not exist. Cities with no names, cities with no addresses, cities that you could only reach if the Soviet government decided you were allowed to know they existed. And what was happening inside them was building the most destructive arsenal in human history. The Soviet Union called them ZATOs. Zakrytye administrativno-territorialne obrazovania. Closed administrative territorial formations. But nobody called them that. They were known simply as the closed cities, or by the people who lived in them as the mailbox cities. Because the only address they had was a post office box number in a nearby town. Chelyabinsk, 40 Sisher, Arzamas, 16, Krasnoyarsk, 26. Numbers attached to the names of real cities, misleading anyone who saw the address into thinking the mail was going somewhere ordinary. It began on August 6, 1945. The United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Stalin watched from Moscow and understood immediately what it meant. The Americans had a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. The Soviet Union did not. In a world defined by that gap, the Soviet Union was vulnerable in a way it had never been before. Stalin gave the order the same month. Build a bomb. Whatever it takes, wherever it has to be built. The man Stalin chose to run the program was Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Not a scientist, not an engineer. A man whose primary skill was organizing large numbers of people under conditions of extreme coercion, which was exactly what Stalin needed. Because what Beria was about to build required secrecy on a scale no government had ever attempted. Entire cities, built from nothing that the outside world would never know existed. The locations were chosen deliberately. Deep in the Ural Mountains, deep in Siberia, far enough from the western borders that American bombers could not reach them, close enough to rivers and lakes to provide the enormous quantities of water that nuclear reactors require, and remote enough that no foreign spy, no Western journalist, no casual visitor could stumble upon them. The construction began using gulag forced labor, prisoners who could be worked without asking questions and disposed of without explanation. The first and most important closed city was Arzamas 16. Established on April 13, 1946, in a monastery town called Sarov, 250 miles east of Moscow. The town's original name was erased from maps. Its residents were relocated, and in their place, the Soviet Union's most brilliant physicists were brought in under conditions of absolute secrecy. They called it Los Arzamas, a dark joke, comparing it to Los Alamos, where American scientists had built the bomb that made all of this necessary. The scientists who came to Arzamas 16 were the best the Soviet Union had. Physicists who had survived the purges, mathematicians who had spent the war calculating artillery trajectories, chemists who had worked on everything from explosives to rocket fuel. They were told they were doing something important for the motherland. They were not always told exactly what, and once they arrived, they could not easily leave. Here's the paradox of the closed cities. Life inside them was, by Soviet standards, extraordinarily good. Soviet physicist Lev Altshuler later described Arzamas 16 as the center of what he called the White Archipelago. We lived very well, he said. Leading researchers were paid a very large salary. Our families experienced no needs. The supply of food and goods was quite different from outside. All material questions were removed. Modern apartments, well-stocked shops, good schools. While much of the Soviet Union was struggling with poverty and shortages, the people building nuclear weapons lived in comfort. Comfort with razor wire around it. The comfort came with conditions. To enter or leave, residents needed a special pass, an internal passport specifically endorsed for the closed city. Foreign nationals were absolutely prohibited. Even Soviet citizens from other cities needed special authorization to visit. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. Travel outside required permission and a reason, and anyone who spoke about their work to an unauthorized person faced the full consequences of Soviet state security. The scientists were prisoners of their own privilege. On August 29, 1949, 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. The device had been assembled at Arzamas-16 by Yuli Khariton and his team. The West had expected the Soviets to need at least 10 years. They had done it in 4. The American monopoly on nuclear weapons was over, and the closed cities, the cities that did not exist, had made it possible. After 1949, the network expanded rapidly. Chelyabinsk 40, now known as Ozersk, for plutonium production. Krasnoyarsk 26, now known as Zheleznogorsk, where an entire nuclear facility was built underground inside a mountain. Tomsk 7, Sverdlovsk 44, Sverdlovsk 45. Each one a city that officially did not exist. Each one a piece of a nuclear weapons program that was reshaping the balance of global power. By the peak of the Soviet nuclear program, there were more than 40 closed cities across the USSR, with a combined population of over 1 million people, living in places that were not on any map. The most extraordinary of all the closed cities was Krasnoyarsk 26. Located deep in the Siberian taiga, the dense forest stretching across northern Russia, it housed something that had never been built before. A complete nuclear facility built inside a mountain. Workers blasted through granite for years, creating tunnels, chambers, and reactor halls hundreds of meters below the surface. The reactors that produced weapons-grade plutonium sat inside solid rock, invisible to American spy satellites flying overhead. The facility remained operational until 2010. But the most dangerous closed city was Chelyabinsk 40, the home of the Mayak plutonium production plant. Built using gulag labor on the eastern slopes of the Ural Mountains, it began producing weapons-grade plutonium in 1948. The pace was so desperate, Stalin's demand for a bomb so urgent, that safety was not a priority. Radioactive waste was dumped directly into the nearby Techa River. Workers received radiation doses far exceeding safe limits. The surrounding villages, which nobody had thought to evacuate, began experiencing mysterious illnesses. And nobody outside the closed city knew why. On September 29, 1957, a cooling system failed in an underground tank storing liquid nuclear waste at Chelyabinsk 40. The force of the blast was equivalent to approximately 70 to 80 tons of TNT. It threw the 160-ton concrete lid off the tank and scattered radioactive material across hundreds of square kilometers. Approximately 10,000 people were evacuated from the surrounding area. 23 villages were eventually demolished. The Techa River, already contaminated from years of waste dumping, became one of the most radioactively polluted waterways on Earth. The Soviet Union covered it up completely. No announcement was made. No international warning was issued. The people evacuated from contaminated villages were told only that they were being moved for unspecified reasons. Some were given 2 hours to pack. Their homes were then bulldozed. Their villages erased from maps, just like the city that had poisoned them. Western intelligence learned of the disaster only through fragments. American U-2 spy planes flying over the Urals photographed unusual activity. Scattered reports appeared in Western newspapers as early as 1958. But the full story did not emerge until 1976, nearly 20 years after the explosion, when Soviet biologist Georges Medvedev published an account in a British scientific journal. Even then, some Western authorities refused to believe him. The Soviet Union denied it had happened until 1989. The Soviet Union denied it had happened until 1989. There is an uncomfortable reason why American authorities were slow to publicize what they knew about Kishtim. Publicizing a Soviet nuclear accident in detail would invite uncomfortable questions about American nuclear safety. Both superpowers had built nuclear programs at reckless speed. Both had generated nuclear waste they did not know how to safely contain. The closed cities of the Soviet Union had their mirror image in American facilities, Hanford in Washington, Oak Ridge in Tennessee, where similar contamination problems were also being quietly managed. Neither side wanted to open that conversation. Neither side wanted to open that conversation. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the closed cities faced a crisis unlike anything they had experienced. For 40 years, they had existed entirely on state funding. The scientists had been paid well. The facilities had been maintained. The secret had been kept. Now, overnight, the funding was gone. The state was gone. And the scientists who had built the most dangerous weapons in human history were suddenly unemployed, in cities that still did not officially exist, with expertise that the entire world was extremely worried might be sold to the highest bidder. Medium pause. The United States was alarmed. In 1998, President Clinton and President Yeltsin approved an agreement called the Nuclear Cities Initiative, a program designed to help scientists in Russia's 10 remaining nuclear cities find civilian work. The logic was simple. A nuclear weapons designer earning nothing in a closed city was a proliferation risk. Pay them to do something peaceful and keep them from selling their knowledge to Iran, North Korea, or anyone else who was interested. The program was only partially successful. Today, most of the Soviet closed cities have been given their real names back. Arzamas 16 is now Sarov. Chelyabinsk 40 is now Ozersk. Krasnoyarsk 26 is now Zheleznogorsk. But many of them remain closed. Sarov, where the Soviet Union's first atomic bomb was designed, is still controlled by Russia's State Nuclear Corporation and requires special permission to enter. Ozersk is still one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Its residents still call it the graveyard of the Earth, and they still consider it a prestigious place to live. One resident of Ozersk, when asked why people stay, said something that captures the paradox of the closed cities perfectly. "We get the best of everything for free," she said. "The schools are good, the hospitals are good, the pay is good. And yes, the river is poisoned. And yes, we don't talk about what happened here. But this is home." The cities that were erased from maps now appear on them. You can find Sarov on Google Maps. You can see the streets of Ozersk from satellite. The secrecy that defined them for 40 years has been partially lifted. But the legacy, the contamination, the weapons, the scientists who spent their lives building things designed to end civilization, that has not been erased. It is still there. In the soil, in the water, in the mountains of the Urals where nobody was supposed to look. The Soviet Union erased entire cities from its maps, and for 40 years, the world did not know they existed. Inside them, scientists built the weapons that defined the Cold War. Workers were poisoned by the facilities they maintained, and when the state that created them collapsed, it left behind contaminated rivers, unemployed weapons designers, and cities that still cannot fully open their doors. There are dozens of stories like this one that most people never hear. Subscribe and we'll keep finding them. The next file is already open.